Peace, everybody. Let me know if you can hear me clear. Peace. Could you hear me clear? Is my sound coming through? Just let me know before I start building. Good, good. Okay. That's peace. So yeah, I come on here, randomly, just to add on. But I will that all of you had an opportunity to check out my recent video of a clip from me being at the United Nations recently. And I wanted to just build a little bit on that this evening and just this concept of nationality and cultural identity as it relates to my experience at the United Nations. So, since like a few years ago, when I had the opportunity to work on the Enslaved docuseries as starring and executive produced by Samuel L. Jackson, when I had an opportunity to participate in that, that award-winning docuseries has been shown globally, and one of the important parts of the release of that documentary was to connect it to the United Nations. And right now, since I think 2015, going into 2024, the United Nations have declared that this is the decade for international recognition of people of African descent. So since 2015 all the way to 2024, this has been the decade to recognize people of African descent and to work towards social economic equality, justice, reconciliation, healing, all of those various different aspects that specifically targets people of African descent, which represents people who will be classified as Black across the diaspora, especially here in the Americas. And when I say Americas, I'm talking about South America, Central America, as well as North America. So that enslaved docuseries, we've also been connected to a lot of the activities that are going on at the United Nations, particularly related to this decade for people of African descent. That has been a program with various different activities and initiatives connected to the United Nations since 2015. I say that to say, once that docuseries was released, I've been able to connect with the United Nations. I think it might have been a year or so ago, I was on a panel discussion virtually with other cast members and people who were involved in the Enslaved docuseries. It's on my YouTube channel if you wanted to go and check it out. I don't have it separated into a playlist or anything, but if you scroll through my videos, you'll see the actual panel discussion that I was a part of related to the Enslaved docuseries. So that was one of the first opportunities that I had to work collaboratively with the United Nations. The second opportunity uh, was featured in a video on the United Nations television network. You could actually see it not only on their YouTube page, but it's also been retweeted from the United Nations based out of Washington, D.C. And you can find it on their website as well. And it's a video feature about me as an educator, the work that I do here in my city, as well as a lot of the community outreach, particularly dealing with youth advocacy. So that was a short, like, docu feature specifically about me and my role in being a part of the Niagara Falls Underground Railroad Heritage Center here in my city as well. So that was the second time, and that was through the United Nations Department of Global Communications. And then more recently, that is the video that you saw on my page prior to this video, where I participated in a screening of the second episode of the Enslaved docuseries, which is called Rationalization, and discussion that followed the screening. And that was my first opportunity to actually be at the headquarters of the United Nations. And it was an experience. And that's what I wanted to kind of build on tonight, as well as some of my perspectives when it comes to nationality and cultural identity. So the headquarters at the United Nations, it's actually represented by United Nations, meaning the security guards up front. There might be a security guard that is from Croatia, and they're working alongside a security guard from Nigeria. You see other different people in positions within that particular headquarters that directly represent different nations. So you see many different people represented in terms of all the human families of the planet Earth. Um, the security is is almost like going through TSA, like the airport. You gotta take your belts off, and you go through a scanner, and there's certain things that you can bring inside of the building. There's other things that you cannot bring inside of the building, like you can't bring in liquids. It's almost like getting on an airplane, right? So that was different for me. Don't you think West Africa will need to cough up some money too? Um, we're gonna get into that discussion, but that's not where I'm at in the discussion right now. I'm just speaking about the actual headquarters of the United Nations and my experience being there recently. So going into that space, one of the things that I noticed just immediately is that people who will be classified as being of African descent or so-called African Americans here, there are not many of us at that headquarters or in that space. And it was me and maybe a few other people who were born here in America that would be classified as being people of African descent that were actually in that space. Majority of people who look like me were from the diaspora, whether they were from Senegal or Ghana or Nigeria or Jamaica or Brazil. One of the things that is unique about that is that all of the other people who looked like me had a sense of nationality. They came from a place that, whether it was colonialized or not, they had a specific homeland. Whether they were Brazilian, whether they were Senegalese, they could call a place their homeland, which was kind of different um, for me because as a person that, according to just the dominant society and even the way in which we describe ourselves oftentimes, being African American, there is no real nationality that is called African American. There's no landmass or no nation called Africa America. It's really, when you think about it, a figment of the imagination. It's not even really a cultural identity. So, looking at this experience through that lens, um, we're in the room and we're speaking specifically about reconciliation as it relates to the transatlantic trade of enslaved people. And a lot of the conversation around reparations was coming from the perspective or rooted in the experience of people who have that sense of nationality, who actually have a seat at an international table known as the United Nations. So if a person from Senegal was speaking, they're really an ambassador or a representative of Senegal. You know, they may not be an official ambassador, but they were speaking from that position of nationality, cultural identity, and there's a seat of power that comes along with that because their flag is literally at the United Nations. When other people were speaking, their flag is represented there at the United Nations. Now, if you're a person that is classified as Black or African American, there's no African American flag. There's no seat of power at the United Nations. And because of that, then there naturally comes a sense of invisibility that people who classify themselves as this identity that sense of invisibility is apparent in the type of conversations that you see and hear at the United Nations. Now, what do I mean by that? If this is a headquarters, which is a gathering of nations, of people who have a sense of nationality, if you're born in a country where you're taught that your identity is Negro, your identity is colored, your identity is Afro American, your identity is Black and African American, none of these categorizations are linked to a landmass. None of those categorizations have a sense of nationality to it. There's no Black flag. There's no Afro American flag. There's no Negro flag. There's no government that's linked to any of those different categorizations. So now here is the problem with that. A lot of us who classify ourselves as Black or African American, we're really buying into an idea and a concept which has no real seat of power, which has no nationality, which is not linked to an actual landmass. I'm walking people through this. So you have a lot of people in this country, a whole demographic of us, who are constantly striving to identify ourselves as something that is not even nationally recognized, that does not have a flag or is not linked to a landmass and does not have a seat of power. So a lot of the things that go on with us in this country who are classified as African American, why would the international community even recognize us? Because number one, we're trying to define ourselves as a nation within a nation, but we really have no sense of nationality. We really have no landmass linked to that identity that we put so much stock in. I will that what I'm saying makes sense to those of you who are listening to this. When people come to this country from Japan or China, they're not constantly encouraged to identify themselves as Chinese American or Japanese American. That's not their primary way in which they define themselves. If they're striving to assimilate into this society, they strive hard to identify as just simply being American. They don't accept being Japanese American or Chinese American or anything like that. It's either one of two things. Either they're living here and they're still holding fast to their social norms and their heritage and their cultural customs, and they are just living here, but they still identify themselves as primarily Japanese, and they build their communities based upon those different aspects of their identity, and they still speak their language, and they're still connected to their homeland, which is Japan. Either they are doing that, or they're striving to check that at the door when they came here to this country, and they're striving to assimilate into becoming accepted as American. It's not them playing two sides of the fence. They're either Japanese and American in America, or they're American. One or the other. Both of the ways in which they strive to identify themselves is access to a seat of power when it comes to nationality. Yeah, they may still be discriminated against if they're striving to define themselves as American, but they at least have access through citizenry, the constitutional rights of an American citizen. Because of discrimination and white supremacy and all of these other different trappings that are just a natural part of the landscape we live on here in America, and the institutions and everything else, they still have some access to citizenry on some level by striving to identify as American. Most of them understand there's no Japanese America, there's no Chinese America. So they realize that that's not a real seat of power. That's really a figment of the imagination. There's no stock in that. The United Nations don't recognize a Japanese America or a Chinese America. As a gathering body of nations, they're going to recognize either America or Japan. Choose, right? But you look at our people as Black people here in America, a lot of us don't want to be American. A lot of us have historically, for over 246 years, have been denied the opportunity and the rights and the privileges of being accepted as an American citizen. More than 75% of the time we've existed here on this land. And I say that because when you even look at this country being founded on July 4th, 1776, there was already 5 generations of enslavement on this land. Then when this country started, slavery continued for another 89 years, and that was the law. That was the law on a federal level, on a regional level, or state level, or local level. That was the law. And then when slavery ended, you had segregation for another 99 years, where we were literally denied the opportunity to participate equitably in American society on federal level, on a regional level, on a state level, on a local level. That was the law for another 89 years. So you think about this country only being here for a little over 245 years. what, 188 of those years, 188 of those years, Black people have been legally denied the right to participate in this society. So I understand why a lot of us don't put any investment or stock in being an American. Why a lot of us don't put our hands over our hearts when it comes to saying the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag or standing for the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag, and simply don't really want much to do with America because we've never felt accepted. We've never felt embraced. And by law, we have not been embraced over 75% of the time we've even been on this land. So I get that and I understand that. It's also evident in the many movements that we started, which were based upon our longing to reclaim our culture and to define ourselves by ourselves. Any of the movements that you look at in this country that we have started as a people have always been movements to reclaim our cultural identity. And you can see why. But then you look at our trajectory as a people in the society and the constant redefinition or categorization of what we actually are, from Negro to colored to Afro American to Black to African American. None of those identities have a seat of power, nor are they rooted in nationality. Nor do they afford us a seat at an international table amongst the gathering of other nations. And then you have some of us who are striving to access that seat of power through claiming nationality based upon our sovereignty as indigenous people here in this land. And some of us have that ancestry, so that's legitimate. Some of us can trace our ancestry to indigenous people of this land. And sometimes we strive to access that seat of power. Right? So my experience going into that space, I had greater insight into what Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and what El Hajj Malik al-Shabazz, what Malcolm X was striving to do. Because the movements that they were a part of prior to them taking a human rights direction was based upon civil rights. Civil rights is a very local perspective of the issues and the concerns that you have going on. These are domestic concerns. And that's one reason why the international community didn't even look at a lot of the different activities that were going on and how we were being treated within the society, because it was looked at as civil rights. These are more domestic issues. That's a problem you're having with your own people in your own country. That ain't got nothing to do with us. Those are civil rights. It wasn't until Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. as well as El Hajj Malik al-Shabazz started to think outside of that domestic spectrum and strive to connect our people with our international community, our people across the diaspora, and started speaking the language of human rights, because that's something that affects all of us as a human family. It also activates the United Nations, which is founded upon international human rights. So when King and Malcolm started to speak that language, which broadened our concerns and the issues that we were having within here domestically to issues that became an international concern, it was shortly after that that both of them got assassinated. Because they started to articulate our sense of nationality in a broader perspective outside of the parameters of being in America. Now, you have movements like the Nation of Islam. You have movements like the Moor Science Temple of America, other different groups that we founded in this country that were created to not only claim our culture and to establish a sense of cultural identity, but to define ourselves as a nation within a nation. Now, here is one of the challenges that I see today. There are many of us who are playing games with this concept of nation. We really don't understand what that means, the sacrifices that it requires. And many of us use this phrase, I'm a part of the nation of the 5%, or I'm a part of the nation of Islam, or I'm a part of this nation or that nation. It's buzzwords a lot of times for just social clubs. Many of us are not really serious and have not fully investigated what it really requires to be a nation and to stand on what sovereignty actually is, and to truly define yourself based upon your constitution, based upon your sense of government or governorship, based upon establishing a military, not just institutions and being an entrepreneur and some of these other things. I'm talking about the ability to actually protect what it is that you stand on nationally. A lot of us we kind of want to play both sides of the fence, right? There's a lot of us who are here in America, and we're really not striving to fully assimilate. Many of us really have a disdain with being an American because we've been lied to, we've been minimized and cheated and everything else when it comes to what citizenry affords us. So a lot of us, we ain't trying to be no Americans. We ain't proud of that. We live here, right? But if that is truly how we feel, we only really have two options. If we really don't want to embrace our citizenry and really be American and fight this fight to gain the rights and the privileges that comes along with this citizenry, if we really don't want to fight that fight and to take that route, the only other real route is straight independence. It's straight nationality and sovereignty, total separation. It can't be both sides. You can't play like you want to be sovereign and you got to have some nationality, or you the God over here and this is your nation, but yet over there you're not fully striving to access the rights and the privileges that comes along with that American citizenry. You can't play both sides of the fence. In other words, there is no Japanese America or Japan America. There's no China America. There is no Africa America. And if you really want to be an African American, then you have to really fully be committed to that path. You fully have to create an Africa America. You have to get your own land. You have to establish government. You have to establish military. You have to establish infrastructure and institutions and everything else that comes along with an actual nation if you want to be Africa America. Because if that is not the route, then putting stock in that identity has no seat of power at all, because there is no connection to a landmass. There is no nationality there, which means there's no way to protect something that does not exist. I hope what I'm saying makes sense. There is no way to protect something that does not exist. The United Nations has embassies in different countries. If you come from a certain nation, you can seek sanctuary at the embassy because you represent that certain nation that has a seat at the table of that League of Nations. And if you don't have that sense of nationality, there's no sanctuary for you, no matter where you go, because you're not recognized when it comes to a person that is a citizen of a nation. So it's impossible to play both sides of the fence. Either you have to be fully committed to being sovereign when it comes to this national identity, or you have to be completely committed to this identity nationally that you are a citizen of, American. Everything that I'm sharing right now, our indigenous family members have gone through since the Europeans came over to this country. And they have been fighting this fight for generations, striving to maintain their cultural identity and their nationality, which is constantly under attack and constantly being um, uh, destroyed consistently. And at the same time, you have a lot of indigenous people who this government, this society, also consistently strives to get them to relinquish their nationality and their cultural identity. It's no different than striving to make a treaty and get them to give up their land, or to strive to remove them from that land. That's an attack on nationality. That's not just an attack on a person's cultural identity, that's an attack on their nationality. Because how could you have a nation if you don't have no land? There's no nation on the internet. You know, right now, as a 5%er, we've been going through, some challenges in terms of um, sustainability when it comes to, some of our sites, some of our land. And many of us don't understand the importance of securing and protecting our land. There's many of us that can invest in land, but we see other things that are more of an important investment than that, and not pooling our resources together. Early this year, I made a legal move to help secure and to protect our land by securing some intellectual property for our nation that I went and got for our nation and gathered some of us together in order to give it to our nation. But there were many of us that didn't want it. Many of us were not at the point where they could see the vision and the importance of being able to protect our cultural identity in the public domain. But that is where some people were at and still are at in their development. So as a 5%er, there's many of my own brothers and sisters who say that they are part of the 5% nation, the 5% nation of gods and nerves, they this, that, and the third, and they really don't have a concept of nationality. they're really not striving to really invest in what that means to be a nation. It's a social club to many of us. Many of us feel a sense of belonging and a sense of pride and esteem by using that word nation because we're connected to others that share a common language or some common ideas. But when it comes to the actual landmass, when it comes to actual structure or government or organization, when it comes to infrastructure and economic basis, institutions being built, many of us are not really invested in that. So it becomes a game. You know, you can't have it both ways. You can't be a member of the 5% nation and then not fully invested in nationality or striving to represent us at the United Nations. If that is not the route that we're really striving to go in, if we're calling ourselves a part of the Moors and that's our nationality, if we're really not striving to advocate that sense of nationality and sovereignty and cultural identity, if we're really not striving to do that, then we really need to strive to be fully American. Or maybe go to some other country and get citizenship there and be a part of that nation. So that's one of the unfortunate things that has happened to a lot of my people, my ancestors that live here, not just in the Americas when it comes to the wilderness of North America, but in, you know, South America and Central America. A lot of us are orphans. A lot of us don't have a real sense of nationality. A lot of us are not really connected to a landmass. Which puts us in a very vulnerable position because that is not a position which is a seat of power. What do I mean by that? If you're walking around in a city and you ain't got no family there, you're not really connected to any of the institutions. No one's going to vouch for you. You can't get a loan. You can't get any references in order to get access to various different um, opportunities in that society or in that municipality. That's a very vulnerable position to be in. Think about how vulnerable it has historically been for Black people in America when we're not even recognized as human beings. Think about that for a second. Think about being enslaved and you had no rights at all because you weren't even recognized as a human being. Think about how vulnerable that position is. Think about that. That is not a seat of power at all. And then when slavery ended on paper, you have segregation where now you are legally locked out of opportunities in this country, which also is a very vulnerable position. I had a chance to build with Dr. Terrence Roberts one time, and Dr. Terrence Roberts is one of the Little Rock Nine. So he was one of the first students that integrated the high school in Little Rock, Arkansas. So he was telling me about some of the experiences of being a child at that time, going to an all-white school and what he had to contend with every single day and how vulnerable he was. Where you're going into a class and the teachers, not only do they not want you in the class, but they're creating a hostile environment in that class because they're saying things to you directly that you can't even retort. You can't even respond to. You are powerless. and they're encouraging the other students to harass you and to create a hostile environment. He was telling me that if you were, they had to, him and some of the other students, they had to learn ways to navigate that building so that they were aware of any of the blind spots in that building so that they did not put themselves in a situation where they could be assaulted by some of the other students. And they were going there to learn, and they had to contend with that every single day. He was telling me that one of the young women that they went to school with, one of the young girls, they would have to go into the bathroom in twos because if they ever went in there by themselves, other white girls would be waiting for them to go into the bathroom, and they would go in there, lock the door behind them, light toilet paper rolls on fire, and throw them over the stalls while they were striving to use the bathroom. This is the kind of environment that they had to actually go to school in. Think about how vulnerable you are. And here's the thing. If anything, he said that if anything happened to you in school, anything happened to you in school, the only way that they would even consider investigating what happened is if you had a white student that was willing and able to vouch for seeing and witnessing that it happened. And they would have to put it in writing. So you literally could not do anything about what was happening to you every day because you had to depend upon a white student that didn't want you there in the school to begin with to vouch for and to be a witness to you being assaulted. You could come into the office with blood running down the side of your face. And unless you had a white student that would vouch for you and say that they witnessed this and was able to put it in writing, they would do nothing about what happened. Think about being in that type of vulnerable state. Think about that. So you think about all of the other different instances, all the way up to today in 2022, where you have people who are classified in this society as Black or African American, people who are classified as Indigenous or Native American in this society, other different groups that are considered marginalized or othered from the dominant society of people who are classified as white. Think about all of these other different groups of people and how vulnerable it is to be in these spaces where traditionally and generationally we were legally denied the right to even be here. Think about how vulnerable that is. So to be in an environment where you don't have any rights, you're not recognized as a citizen, you're denied opportunities based upon your skin color or your gender or your age or your ability. You're denied all of these different type of opportunities. And years ago, there were actual laws on the books that denied people these opportunities. You can literally read the laws that would say a person that is a Negro cannot marry a white person. It's literally written down. No Japs allowed. Literally, laws written down that deny people access and opportunities. A lot of times today, that's not popular. It's not tasteful to really do that, even though you still see evidences of that, even to this day. Some of that historic attitude towards people of African descent or Black people or Indigenous people or any other marginalized group in the society, you still see consistent evidence that this attitude of othering or disenfranchising or undermining opportunities of these groups of people still exists. We still see that because it's a part of the fabric of this country. It was founded on separation and a supremacist idea that white is all right. And if you black, you need to get back. If you brown, you could kind of hang in the back around. You know, this notion that this is, you know, the land of the free and the home of the brave. It wasn't talking about everybody. So you think about being in these kind of vulnerable positions and vulnerable spaces when you don't have a sense of nationality, true nationality. You are in a perpetual space and state of vulnerability. Perpetual state of vulnerability. So yeah, bringing it back, you know, being in the United Nations, I really had an opportunity to just see how invisible that many other nations are to our plight as African Americans or Black people here in America. Because people don't recognize a nation called Africa America. That's not a nationality. So if you're calling yourself something that doesn't exist, why would people recognize issues connected to people that are connected to something that doesn't exist? That may mean that maybe your issues and problems don't really exist. Because you're striving to define yourself as a nation within a nation, but that's not really a nation. There's no nation called Africa America. So why would a people put so much stock into that identity when there's no place? So if there's literally no place, how can your issues or your concerns actually have a place? Right? Now, if you're having these issues and concerns, but yet you are not emphasizing the identity of being African American, you're calling yourself an American. You look like this, but you're calling yourself an American. A lot of times, the international community is still not going to get involved or recognize that because that's a domestic issue. As an American, you have an issue with your own country. That really ain't got much to do with us. So when I was in there, I saw the invisibility. And at the same time, sometimes people of African descent or other people who look at us as a group here in America may look at us like, what y'all complaining about? Y'all been there for hundreds of years. I mean, look, you got Jay-Z, you got Beyonce, you got Oprah Winfrey. I mean, look at Kanye West. He got free speech. What are y'all complaining about? As a matter of fact, look at your people. You're so influential globally, culturally speaking, because of the hip hop that you created. You're very influential people. What are you complaining about? So some people really look at it like that. Like, y'all can't be doing that bad. Things ain't that bad over there in America. You got all of these kind of opportunities. Look at all of your rappers. Look at all of those diamonds and gold and everything else. Look at how they present themselves. Y'all doing good over there. Y'all ain't got no issues like that. And some people are really looking at things through that type of lens. So if you look at it, the denationalization movement, because that's exactly what happened when you're talking about the transatlantic slave trade, when you're talking about the genocide of indigenous people, when you're talking about these different movements were really a denationalization process. A denationalization process. Because as long as you don't have a nation or a sense of nationality, you're not connected to a landmass. And if you don't have a landmass, a place doesn't exist. There is no place. And if you don't really have a place, then you don't really have a purpose. Your issues are not even really valid. It's almost like saying that you have imaginary friends and you're identifying yourself based upon these imaginary friends. And you're constantly referring to these imaginary friends as being the foundation of who you are. How many people is going to take your issues and your concerns seriously when you can't even show them a place of origin of those imaginary friends? When we don't have a sense of nationality or nationhood, it delegitimizes our issues. It delegitimizes our self-concept, and it undermines our potential to establish a seat of power. Think about the movement that Malcolm was pushing for before he got assassinated. The Organization of African American Unity. That was a movement that was able to connect us to a seat of power globally and to broaden our perspective and our issues that we were having within the borders or the boundaries of America that were civil and reframing it as human rights. Dr. King was doing the exact same thing, pushing to reframe our issues, reframe them as not just civil, but as human rights, which activated the international community because we're all a human family. America didn't like that. It's no different than being in a house where there's emotional and physical abuse going on. The people who are perpetrating that abuse in the house, they don't want you to tell anybody outside of the house who has the ability to actually do something about it. They don't want you to have that type of conversation. So I think us as a group and us throwing this concept around about being a nation here and this is our nation and everything, we really need to rethink what that means. Because unless we're really going to be a nation and not no social club and just hanging out and getting together, and we're really not invested in institution building or striving to create an economic base or infrastructure or government or organization, if we're really not invested in that, then we need to stop playing and just say, yo, and this is like my social club. I hang out over here, but I'm really an American. And if you really don't want to be an American, then you need to go somewhere where you feel more comfortable with that citizenry or that national identity. Go to Japan if that's where you feel most comfortable. Or go to Cameroon. Go to South Africa. Go somewhere else where you can have a sense of nationality, which is going to give you access to a real seat of power. Because if you're not going that route, then you need to really be invested in sovereignty. And again, everything that I'm building about right now, our indigenous brothers and sisters have been dealing with that since the inception of this country. Because in order for this country to be established, this nation of America had to gather and confiscate land as the basis or the foundation for that seat of power. So our indigenous family have always been dealing with this concept and just this whole struggle for nationality and sovereignty and identity to this day. And they're fighting that fight. Look at Haiti. Look at the fight that they've consistently had to fight. Because of our liberation and us defining ourselves as a nation. We've had to deal with embargoes since that happened. We've had to consistently fight for that sense of identity and nationality. And even to this day, you still have other nations striving to encourage Haitians or indigenous people or other different people to relinquish that nationality and just come on over here and just assimilate into us. Give up that land, give up everything else, and just become a part of us. Just be assimilated into who we are. To what extent does the system's perimeter begin to limit growth? It limits growth as soon as a person is born. As soon as we're born into this society, there's a system in place that limits our growth. And that's on many different levels. I'm not just talking about national identity or citizenry. I'm talking about nutritionally or health wise. Because you look at the so called standard American diet, that shit is wrong. But people are introduced to that as soon as they're born. You look at the educational system, that limits people's growth, even the way in which it's constructed. People are not really being educated, which means to really draw out of a person what's already there. People are being socialized and programmed. So that's a limitation when a person is not encouraged to grow and to find their purpose in life and to create contributions to this society to bring more beauty to it and to help encourage others to discover their purpose. Unless you have your own system in place to help a life form continue on that type of trajectory, you're going to constantly face limits in your growth and development. All of us do. But we have to have our own family units and systems in place, communities in place that helps encourage our growth and development. So when you say system, I'm talking about all of the different aspects of the systems, the institutions, the economy. They all have aspects of them that limit our growth. You also have some aspects within the system that encourages our growth. So in other words, the same screwdriver that a person used to commit a crime can be the same screwdriver that is used in order to build something. So in some instances, you have aspects of the system that can be used in a positive, productive way when it comes to our growth. But then there's other things that are no. That's not going to encourage no positive growth. If there's certain habits that you adopt when it comes to your diet and nutrition, some of those things, it doesn't matter who it is, that's not going to set you on a healthy trajectory in life. And that may be something encouraged by this system. Things that you learn all throughout school when it comes to the food chart and everything else is not good. But then you may have other things in that food chart that, I should incorporate that into my diet. And it works well. Do you think West Africa will need to cough up money, or nations who help capture? You know what? That's a discussion that we were having um, at the United Nations. And the problem is, not only do a lot of people not want to take responsibility, but they know that that responsibility translates into practical action. So we talk about um, reparations. Um, that is an actual thing that needs to happen. So one of the things that I've noticed is a lot of the atonement or idea of repairing the damage that was actually done is just symbolic stuff. I've seen in West Africa, you had, tribal leaders do like a ceremony and different things to ask the ancestors for forgiveness and to acknowledge their part in their participation in the transatlantic trade of enslaved people. And I've seen that kind of symbolic stuff. I've seen some apologies. But unless it translates into actionable items, like what you're saying, money, resources, support, then those are just empty gestures. It's window dressing. So not only are some nations in West Africa responsible for reconciliation or atonement, but also European nations. Everyone that had a hand in that is responsible. Everyone. Because it was a collaborative effort. It was a triangle trade. You had many nations involved in that. And that goes back to what I was saying initially. These were nations that were involved. And the people who were subjected to this were denationalized. Do you see how that works? Those are my ancestors that went through that great Mayafa or that great disaster were denationalized in order for that to take place. But these were nations dealing in people that were systematically denationalized. And sent to different places in the Western Hemisphere, whether that was South America, Central America, or North America. And for generations denied nationality, denied citizenship. I hope you understand what it is that I'm describing and explaining. So some nations in West Africa, have offered dual citizenship They've offered dual citizenship. And that's a start. And the reason that this was a project that was created by some nations is because of the importance of what I'm talking about in terms of being denationalized. They understand the power of nationality. And then by offering dual citizenship to people classified as those of African descent who live here in America or the Caribbean or across other different places in the diaspora coming back to the continent, we bring those skills. So they understand the value in that. They understand the value in that. I know at one time Ghana was, and I was just actually speaking to a brother about that recently. Mm-hmm. And then the AfricanAncestry.com, where you can trace your maternal and paternal lineage. Some nations accept that as valid in terms of you being able to access dual citizenship if your genetic ancestry is actually linked to that particular nation. So those things are a start. But like I said, a lot of us that live over here in America, a lot of us play around with this idea and concept of nation or nationality. We're not really serious about it. And I'm not saying that because of what we say, but I'm saying it because of what we do and how we're invested. A lot of us look at being a nation as a social club. We look at it as a social club. We get together, we hang out, we think that we're a nation because we have common customs and social norms and can speak some of the same language. But if people are so-called Boricua or Puerto Rican and they hear speaking Spanish and eating food that is customary to their family members and their community, yeah, but at least they can go back home to Puerto Rico or the Dominican Republic, or if they are from Mexico, at least they can go somewhere. You know, those of us who are of the 5%, where are we going? Where are we going? And again, when you don't have a sense of nationality, you don't have that sense of real citizenry, you're vulnerable. You have no protection. You have no military. So if we're not serious about going that route of nationality, then we need to quit playing and just be fully invested in the nation that we have citizenship in. And if we not really down with that, then we really need to find a nation that we really feel that we can be fully embraced and get nationality or citizenship there. Because other than that, we're just going to constantly be out here vulnerable with no land to call our own, not building any institutions, not invested in an economic structure or infrastructure or organization or government to support us, our families, and our communities. So I recommend there's only two options. I recommend that we either be fully invested in our identity or our nationality, the same way that you see indigenous people doing. We either have to be 100% committed to our identity and our sovereignty and our nationality in that way, we're willing and able to sacrifice and to go that route and just simply do trading amongst other nations and to engage other nations from that perspective of nationality. We either have to be fully invested that way, or we got to be fully invested in the nationality or the citizenship that we already have. Be an American. If that's your citizenship, then you need to be fully invested in all of the rights and privileges that come along with that citizenry, because that's your nationality. If you don't like it, then you need to figure out a way that you can become a citizen of a nation that you feel most comfortable and you feel less vulnerable in, that you feel as if you're going to have the most access to your rights as a citizen in that nation. It may be Japan. It may be some other nation, but do that then. But if you're not fully committed to saying you of the 5% nation, or you of the Nation of Islam, or you're of the Moorish science nation, or you're the Hebrew nation, or if you're not really Nubian nation, if you're not fully committed to that, then stop playing. Because you're really just committed to an illusion. And I say that it's an illusion because you're not really fully invested in it being an actual place of you really accessing citizenry in that place and building it as an actual nation. If you're not really fully invested in that, you're just playing. You're wasting your time, you're wasting everybody else's time, and no one's going to look at that as something serious. So now, if you saw the video that I recently put out when I was at the United Nations, that is why I deliberately began my comments in the clip that you saw by stating what part of the nation that I belong to, what I represent. I don't know of anybody that has done that is a part of my nation of the 5%, who've gone to the United Nations and have stated in the chambers of the United Nations that this is your nation and what you are a part of and what you represent. I don't know anybody who has done that yet. For some people that was in that room, that was the first time that they ever heard of the 5% nation of gods and earths. But again, that is the headquarters of the United Nations, and that is broadcast across the world. So the world may be hearing for the first time that we are here. Yeah, the ADOS community disappointed me because they look down on me because my father is from Grenada. Yeah, some people who are a part of that community are a little off. But this idea of recognizing the land that you come from, being proud of that doesn't mean that you are anti somebody else. But some people do. Some people act like that, which is wrong. You know, if you're proud of being defined as a black man, it doesn't mean that you're anti-white. But some people carry themselves that way. If you listen to them and you look how they treat other people, you can see that they feel that, you know, that being proud of being white means you gotta hate black. Or being proud of being brown means you gotta hate white. Or being proud of being black, you gotta hate white. Sometimes that does not mean what it is. You can be proud of who you are without belittling and ridiculing and undermining other people. And that's sometimes what I see in the ADOS community. And you know, I also understand, because being in the United Nations, a lot of the conversations that were spoken about reparations were spoken from the perspective of nationality, of nations being recognized for the impact that happened to them. But yet you have a whole demographic and segment of people who were denationalized through this process of the transatlantic trade of enslaved people, who are here in America, that this discussion from other Black people across the diaspora are not including this segment of the population in that discussion about reparations. You rarely hear that. When you hear people who are from Jamaica or from the other islands and they're talking about reparations, a lot of times they're not having a conversation and including Black people in America. They're talking about their own people, yes, their own people who have been impacted by the transatlantic slave trade. Their own people in the islands. That's and Britain's relationship to their nation. That's how they're framing this discussion about reparations. A lot of times they're not talking about, oh, our people who are impacted here in the Caribbean and in America and what our brothers and sisters is going through in America. You don't hear a lot of that kind of conversation. It's almost like, yo, what are y'all going to do to atone for and to reconcile what you did to our people here in the islands? So when you look at the whole movement of American descendants of slaves and foundational Black Americans, that is specifically because a lot of us are invisible. We're treated as invisible. And then you look at all of the propaganda that we see on social media and on television. A lot of Black people across the diaspora think that y'all don't need nothing. Y'all good over there. Look at Beyonce. She's one of the biggest stars in the world. Y'all created hip hop, and that's the most influential culture around the world. Rap music is one of the biggest selling genres in this world, and y'all created it. Look at y'all style. Everybody's following and trying to copy Black people in America. What are y'all complaining about? Y'all don't need no reparations. Y'all been there hundreds of years. Y'all good. So some people have that kind of perspective of us over here. And they think if we talking about racism, we talking about white supremacy and being discriminated against and all this other stuff, that we're just complaining. You have it good. Yup, Black is American thing. Race is really an American thing. I live right across the border from Canada, and I've spent a lot of time over there over the years. As soon as you go across the border, when you see people who are classified as of African descent, we define ourselves based upon our nationality. If a person, and I run into somebody across the border in Canada and they say that they're Black, I know immediately that that is an American influence. Because in America, you're racialized. On the Canadian side, people identify with their nationality. They say, I'm Eritrean, I'm Ethiopian, I'm Senegalese, I'm Jamaican, I'm whatever. They're not just really going to say they're Black. If they do, that's some American influence. So it's possible to recognize our unique experiences as a people and how we've been harmed and what needs to happen in order to restore a sense of equity and balance in our communities without demonizing or minimizing the journeys of our people who are in other places. And that is one of the problems. You know, there wouldn't be a foundational Black American movement or American descendants of slaves movement if we didn't feel invisible, if we didn't feel as if people were just overlooking us and just acting like our concerns about reparations weren't legitimate. We've always been excluded from that type of conversation when it comes to a lot of our people across the diaspora. So those movements were started in order to bring, not only to raise that issue, but to also communicate that, we are impacted by all of this too. But here is the problem. When you are denationalized, where is your real basis to bring issue to another nation? It's easier for people from the islands, if you're from Jamaica or some of these other different islands that suffer from transatlantic enslavement of people of African descent, who suffer from that. It's easier for them from that national seat of power to engage a nation like Britain and say, you are responsible for this. Because we are engaging you as a nation. A lot of us here in America, we're not engaging other nations. First of all, a lot of us are in here trying to tell our own country, y'all need to correct this. In order to have that seat of power, there has to be organization, an agency, an investment in order for anything to be moved. But if we're a group within this country, we're not going to have that discussion about Britain's role in the transatlantic slave trade. That has to be discussed nation to nation. And America ain't going to have that discussion with Britain. That's their cousin. And they worked on this project together. You think America's going to look at Britain and say, Britain, we have, you remember the people that we worked together and we brought over here and, we enslaved them and stuff like, yeah, they complaining over here, you need to, I know I was a part of it too, but I mean, you was a large part of it. You over there, France, you was a part of it too. Portugal, all of y'all, I mean, y'all need to do the right thing. I mean, these people who, we really didn't want them to be citizens, but eventually yeah, I know. That's the type of conversation that some of us are expecting America to have with these European nations. I hope what I'm saying makes sense. I hope that it makes sense. We really need to reframe our concept of nationality and what it means to be a nation. It ain't no damn social club. It ain't hanging out, eating similar foods and speaking similar language and thinking that you have some sense of sovereignty and identity. That is not nationhood, and that is not nationality. A lot of us is playing. And if that's what we think it is, then we really need to rethink what nationality is and what it really requires of us, because it requires a lot of sacrifice. And you simply just need to look at our indigenous brothers and sisters, the sacrifices that they've consistently made over the generations to maintain not only their cultural identity, but their sense of sovereignty and nationhood. That is the biggest evidence that we need to look at if we really striving to take that route. But many of us is not. We too assimilated. We too comfortable. And we're too invested in the society. And here's what I'm saying. Be honest about that. If that's where we're at in our development, then just strive to be the best American that you can be. Fight that fight in terms of gaining all of the rights and privileges that come along with that American citizenry. Fight that. But don't play around with this concept of nationhood and nationality if you're not really serious about committing yourself to separation. It can't be both. You can't be hobnobbing and acting like, yeah, I'm this nation member and I'm this, that, and the third, but then you fully invested in assimilating into the society. You can't have both. We really got to be clear about what it is that we're striving to do. And if you really not feeling being American like that, then you really need to think about getting citizenship in a place that you feel fully respected and honored as a citizen. So there's only really three things that I see as a solution to any of this. Either be true and committed about sovereignty and nationality and separating yourself. Take the route of our indigenous brothers and sisters, or be fully committed and gaining the citizenry and the rights that come along with being an American and fight for those rights. Do that. Or the third option is, if you ain't really got the heart to be sovereign and to be invested in your real nationality and to be a real nation, if you ain't got the heart and the sacrifice to do that, and you really ain't down with being American like that, then you need to find you a nation that you're gonna be comfortable in as a citizen. That's all I see. And having that experience at the United Nations, it really opened my eyes to seeing a lot of things that I would have not seen unless I was in that space. And it also gave me a lot more perspective of some of the work that Dr. King was doing, as well as El Haj Malik Al Shabazz, that Malcolm was actually doing, in terms of reframing our plight here on this land from not civil rights, but to human rights, and broadening that discussion to connecting us to the international community. So that people understood that they had a vested interest with what was actually going on to us in this country, because we were really functioning, and still are in a lot of instances, as a nation within a nation. So I appreciate y'all for taking the time to hang out with me tonight. Um, I just had to come on and just share some perspectives on my recent experiences, and I will that some of the things that I've shared will inspire, empower, and educate you, and just give you some things to think about in terms of where we're at as a people, and what direction we need to go in. We need to stop playing with this idea of being a nation if we're not really fully invested and committed to getting land that we call our own and building our own institutions and our own infrastructure. A lot of us is playing a game, and there's no real seat of power that we're establishing when it comes to the dynamics of the society that we live in. There's no real impact to this political landscape that we're living on, playing these type of games. Where we calling ourselves a nation, and all it is a social club. So in the chat, I just put a link to my Atlanta School renovation project. If you're interested, you want to support the work that I'm doing with establishing one of my institutions, the Atlantis School for Gifted Youngsters, you can go to the website, get some more insight into the work that I'm actually doing. I also have quite a few videos on my page that shows you the type of work that I've been doing in terms of institution building and the commitment to what it is that I've been talking about tonight. This is not a game to me. It's not no social club to me. And willfully, through the different things that I do, that you can all see that I'm serious about this type of work. And we need many more of our people to be serious about this work as well, if we're really going to bring about some change, not only in our communities, but also across this country, because we really need to establish that seat of power. And if we're about nation building, then we really need to rethink what that means in terms of nationality. So, peace, and I'll be with y'all again another time. Have a good night.